Murry Sidlin, resident conductor of the Oregon Symphony. Conductor Sidlin was appointed to this post in May of 1994. He also serves as the James DePriest Professor of Music at Pacific University. He will continue to conduct a San Diego Symphony already sold out series. He serves as the artistic director for the Cascade Festival of Music in Bend, Oregon this summer, and I could go on and on about the assignments he has taken on since his arrival in this Northwest Territory. If that leaves the impression that he is rooted to the West and the Pacific Northwest particularly, let me cite the locations of other recent and upcoming symphonic engagements: St. Louis, San Francisco, Houston, Pittsburgh, Minnesota, Jerusalem, Quebec, Honolulu, Vancouver, British Columbia. It goes on and on. There's much more in the literature about this man, but his speaking for himself and his particular interests is a better path to follow at this particular moment. The New York Times noted, quote, "The conception of this conductor, Murry Sidlin, was marked by an irresistible spiritual propulsion tempered with an actor's timing." The Oregonian's description is not quite as erudite, but gives folks like me a better picture of what we have in store for us. Quote, "He's a cross between Lenny, Leonard Bernstein that is, and Leno, Jay Leno that is. Conductor Sidlin, the City Club welcomes you."
Thank you, Don. It could have been worse. It could have been Lenny Bruce, I suppose. I never know what those quotes mean. I tell you, I'm very happy to be here as your guest today. I'm only sorry that Lorin isn't with you. One of my favorite people, one of the great people of our time, one of the most sensitive, brilliant artists, one of the most compassionate men, and one of the most articulate on behalf of art and society, and specifically and in particular art education, which would have been the subject of his discussion today, and I will try to pick up that mantle to a certain degree. I was driving out to Pacific University yesterday to deliver a lecture to my class on the Wagner operas in 20 minutes or less, the Reader's Digest version of the Wagner operas, and I heard on the radio that conductor Murry Sidlin will address the City Club tomorrow. I tried to stay out of the center lane and talk about Goals 2000 and the $10 billion allotment therein, a bill that I had never read before. And so I would be very happy to make up anything you want to hear about this and express an opinion, even though I have none, but we'll get to that in a moment. Just a moment about what I do at Pacific University. Actually, what I do there really takes place more in the concert hall. I direct a conducting program for apprentice conductors. And exactly a week ago today, I was delivering a paper that is not the Oregonian under your car in the morning, as it is in my driveway. Delivering a paper, meaning talking about to a group called the College Music Society, which is an organization made up of deans and music administrators and professorial specialists in the art of music who teach in upper education and higher education. Here, they were having their national conference here in Portland, and I was addressing them on the issue of teaching the developing conductor. And on my way to the Hilton, where I was going to deliver this lecture, this demonstration lecture, with my apprentices, I passed by the Schnitzer Concert Hall, and up on the marquee it said, "Jane Goodall speaking on my life with chimpanzees." And I thought that maybe, Portland is too small of a town for two people to be delivering exactly the same lecture on the same day. Nevertheless, there it was. So if you see her name as guest conductor of the Oregon Symphony next year, you'll understand how this came about, actually. One of the most phenomenal qualities of Lorin Hollander that one immediately discerns, and as you get to grow into a relationship with him, as I've been privileged to do over the years as conductor and performer and as co-colleagues in educational matters and serving on forums together and speaking in the same... Is it something I said? Thank you. Is it that we should... My guess is we should leave this room, no? Huh? Yes. I didn't realize we were going to have contemporary music play this afternoon, actually. It's a false alarm. By John Cage, one of my favorite pieces, actually. Thank you for performing that, because That's right. Thank you. And that was Orson Welles telling you it was a false alarm. You forgot to say enjoy your lunch. At any rate, I was about to talk about, where was I? Good afternoon. Thank you, Don, for your very nice introduction. Let's see, then we talked about Jane Goodall. We talked the conducting program. Yes, okay, I know where I am. That's it. Lorin, one of his greatest attributes is that of humility. That he is a person who serves art so richly and so handsomely. And because of that, he's one who certainly recognizes, and we recognize about him, that one has to have a very strong ego assertion in order to decide to go up on stage and perform in front of people and to share your music with people. But once your hands go up and before they touch the keyboard, or in my case, once they go up and before you deliver the downbeat from that upbeat to the orchestra, the upbeat being the DNA of the phrase and the downbeat being the resultant conglomeration of sound from that upbeat, then something has to take place called humility before the music, because we are not the creators, but we are the co-creators, and that we are the servants of the composer's art. People find that humility in different places at different times in their careers in different ways. I thought I would share with you just a little bit about when it came to me regarding humility in music. There was a time several years ago when I was conductor of the New Haven Symphony for some 12 years. And I remember coming back after a concert, and there was a message from the babysitter that said, Mr. Sidlin, the New York Times called, and they would like to speak with you, and they'll call back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Well, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. There'd been a reception after the concert. I was very tired. I knew I'd be groggy in the morning. So before going to bed, I went to my desk, and I started to outline a few thoughts so that I shouldn't be caught off guard, so I could say something reasonably intelligible and intelligent, and perhaps even insightful and quotable, should they want to hear any of these quotes from me. And I began to think of the three areas about which they could be curious. Number one, I had just spoken at a major educational conference in the state of California, and I had said some, I would suspect they could be categorized as rather outrageous comments regarding the arts education in American life, specifically in California life. I mean, the legislators were in the audience. I thought that this would be a good way to get their attention. And so the wire services in the West Coast had picked up a number of the quotes, and I thought that maybe the New York Times wanted me to elaborate on that. So I jotted down a few, shall we say, pithy reflections of what I might be able to add to what they might already know. Secondly, the Connecticut Ballet, of which I was still listed as music director, even though it was a part-time association, was about to go out of business for the third time that year. And It was a very difficult time for them, and they had run a story. The New York Times had run a story on them, and this could be a follow-up to that, quoting somebody in artistic authority about the fate of that organization. So I made some comments about that. And the third, it could be that there was a musician who was working with me when I was conductor of the Long Beach Symphony at that time in California, who had met a very tragic death. And the wire services had picked up a story on that, and this was a very awful, awful time, and perhaps they wanted a quote to follow up on the circumstances of that particular tragedy. At any rate, I made notes, went to bed, confident that I would not be caught off guard. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the next morning, groggy as I was, the phone rang, and I picked it up. Hello, Mr. Sidlin? Yes, this is the New York Times calling. Yes, what can I do for you? We'd like to know if you wish to subscribe. But I already take the New York Times. Sunday also? Yes. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye. Humility. Humility comes to the conductor. If I had had time, and sometime maybe you'll be kind enough to invite me back where I can develop a formal statement for your consideration and dissemination, I would like to develop an entire paper around the subject that begins actually from a little article that I clipped from the New York Times last week. And the date line is Gilroy, California. You know where Gilroy is? I just learned this morning. Okay. Gilroy, California, November 2nd. Young people caught breaking curfew could soon get the maximum penalty, no television. A citizen group concerned about youth violence plans to ask the city council here to set up a detention center for anyone under 18 years old breaking Gilroy's 11 p.m. curfew. A spokesman for the group wants to make the detention center an unpleasant experience. Violators would be held in an auditorium without television and be forced to listen to classical music while waiting for their parents to pick them up. Now, wait a second. You are aghast. You're doing this because you are in public. But if you were in private, you would turn the page after raising half an eyebrow, and you know I'm telling you the truth. And I know that's the case because there has been no outpouring of sentiment against the cuts of the National Endowment for the Arts. And this is all related. A small town which can legislate for its children punishment, which is to listen to classical music, can produce parents so apathetic to what art means in American life as to allow the things that are happening to happen. For example, when I did get a chance to read Goals 2000, H.R. Bill 1803, I think it is. Let me see. 1804, excuse me. 1803 is probably something minor like capital punishment or something like that. I don't really know. This is the Educate America Act. I had a concert to conduct with the Portland State University kids last night. When I came back very late at night, this had been dropped off by messenger, and I read most of it last night, just down to the details of the finances. I always leave that to other people. But what I did discern, or rather what I didn't discern, was in this bill, I did not discern a number of things concerned with humanism. There are two things that I want to bring you to your attention, since I'm supposed to talk about this a little bit. Goal number 1, it says, by 2000, to make every child ready for school, ready for learning. That's very admirable. No one would disagree with that, except those taking away the breakfast and lunch programs, those taking away the daycare programs, and diminishing medical attention for impoverished children. And so, what do we mean by each child? All those who aren't impoverished, and it's all right for the majority of those who happen to be minorities not to be ready to learn? Is that what's implied here? That's the language that I'm getting from it. Language being very imprecise can often be imprecise at first and very precise on second reading. because one finds that there are loopholes that are intentional by virtue of people who write these things who are very careful. They word very carefully. One only had to read the law in California. They tried to pass in Colorado regarding gay rights a couple of years ago to realize that if you voted for, you were voting against. If you voted against, you were voting for. But only the League of Women Voters pointed that out to everybody. That's number one. The other thing that strikes one very strongly in the issue of Goals 2000, this $10 billion Goals 2000, is the issue of objectives. What they say concerns primarily acquisition of knowledge and skills. That's it. It doesn't say anything about compassion. It doesn't say anything about the objective of education being to humanize the student in perspective and in relation to community. It doesn't say that anywhere. It doesn't delineate objectives of education except for knowledge and skill. So what does that imply? Well, it implies that we have to raise a group of kids who can make a living. Boy, if you don't make money, you're nothing in this society. I've heard that. I've read that. I've seen it. But you know something? If we don't develop young people who are compassionate, insightful about human values, who respect uniqueness, who understand that the whole nature of education is to allow people to make judgments based on sensitivity and a wide scope of envisioning, then I wonder if Goals 2000 is not yet another wonderful American leaf, L-E-A-F. Let me explain. In European culture, in artistic culture, what happens is that somebody, somehow, somewhere, something, some natural event, some deity, I don't care, whatever you would like to estimate is the cause, puts a seed into the earth. And when that seed is nurtured, it springs in two directions: downward, seeking to grasp and to gain hold, permanent hold, and upward, as life springs toward air, water, heaven. And this begins the process of nurturing and growth. And ultimately, those roots take shape, take hold, and something becomes solid as a result of the root, and branches spring, and more branches and leaves and so forth. And ultimately, what we have is something strongly and fully alive for all time, hopefully. And that is the definition of European culture. In America, we have leaves. We put out leaves, and when one dies, we replace it with another leaf. That we constantly put out leaves without really building the firm foundation on which these leaves can thrive and come back to us through the natural cycle of seasons, if properly nurtured. And I wonder if Goals 2000 isn't another concept that is based on leaves without the firmament, without the firm rooting. This is a legitimate question, because I don't find in Goals 2000 stated any objective except skill and knowledge. But I don't find the values that form the essence of wonder, fantasy, imagination, and creativity. What are the importance of all those? Why don't you ask Mr. Bill Gates? Maybe in his brain trust, I wouldn't be surprised if he surrounds himself with a lot of people who have creativity, who have the sense of wonder and imagination. And only then, as a result of those spirited and spiritual qualities, only then did the technology, the skill, and the knowledge really mean something, really have some profound effect. What concerns me today is how we view art in society. Oregon is not an exception. Oregon is a part of a national crisis. As all those people who have told me ever since I've been here, which is just a year and a couple of months now, that the problem of the Oregon schools in terms of art education is this and that and the other. I've heard it all before. I've been to many states and I've seen it many places. There are a couple of oases, however. One of them, a very profound one, being built just over the line in Vancouver, in this School for the Arts, Shumway School, which is just opening now formally. And I've met with the people there, Leslie Durst and a few others, who are extraordinary in their passion for making sure that a place for a solid grounding in arts education, in a visionary arts education, is available to children who, from that community, want to come there. A lot of Portland kids want to come there too, but it's not going to be as easy. But that's an oasis. That's not the norm. And that is the passion of one or two or three or four people. Should they somehow no longer be available to that school, there's no policy there that will continue the activation of that school. In the case that we have now nationally, that the arts are really in the hands of individual superintendents or boards of education, some of whom are compassionate, some of whom have the background, some of whom have the leadership and the fortitude to stand up and say in society that the arts are integral to living, to life, to envisioning, for creativity, for imagination, for learning skills, for acquiring knowledge. That the arts are absolutely integral to all of that for the success of the child, the total development of the child, not the success of the child's capability of memorizing or working simply a terminal, or understanding how technology operates through the information superhighway. That, of course, is critical and crucial, but not as useful if it isn't developed in a creative way. Isn't technology the tool of creative people, or is it the regurgitation of automatons? We have to make some decisions here. At any rate, there are oases, but most of the places around the country, arts education is looked upon as trivial. It's looked upon as something to which the red pen can go straight across with no opposition. That's where the National Endowment of the Arts is now. There has been very little opposition except where it is expected from the artists, from arts institutions, of course. Part of the problem there, I feel, and this is the personal opinion, is that we have an artist at the head of the National Endowment of the Arts. And so that no matter how brilliant she is and sensitive and intelligent and all the wonderful things that an administrator should have, what she doesn't have is believability out of the arts community, which the National Endowment has had as long as it has had people at its helm who are not artists. Frank Hotzel, in my estimation, was enormously successful because he was a brilliant politician and a very strong leader on behalf of the artists. The very first director of the National Endowment of the Arts was a political appointment from President Nixon, who I think knew what he was doing when he appointed Nancy Hanks, was extraordinary in the early days of the endowment. We have constantly had people from outside the endowment, with one or two exceptions, from outside the arts community who were very strong and compassionate on behalf of what the arts can mean in society. And when these 40% cuts of the National Endowment are affected, who suffers most? Does the Oregon Symphony suffer? Yes, to a certain degree. We certainly do. We may lose some money. We just have to tack that on to our campaign and hope for the best and work more diligently. And if we don't reach our goal, then we've got to chop something, and those will be the things that are not revenue producing. Guess what? Young people's events. And so the children will suffer. In rural communities, who will suffer? The rural communities. And I just wonder if you realize that the reason why people live out there is because many of them farm, and there isn't room in the city to farm, so they live out there. And that makes it a problem for them. And yet, that's who the endowment helps a great deal. The endowment absolutely has been not only compassionate, but vigorous in its affording grants to rural communities, for which $10,000 is a fortune, because there isn't the population base of 10,000 people at $1 each necessarily to make up that grant. And so the touring this, or the resident that, or this artistic event passing through, those are the things that will be eliminated, same as in public radio. It's not what the politicians yell about. It has nothing to do with Mapplethorpe. It has nothing to do with the few controversial aspects of the National Endowment. It has nothing to do with that. Did anybody say at the tailhook scandal, let's abolish the Navy? Did anybody say that? Here are grown men who are entrusted with the nation's defense, running around with their pants off after women officers or something like that, disgracing themselves and disgracing the service of the nation that they serve. But no one said abandon the Navy. So here, out of thousands and thousands of grants, 10, 12 have been controversial, and people are yelling, abolish the National Endowment of the Arts. It defames all of us. It subjects us to indecent, absolutely indecent materials. Even though during the Mapplethorpe exhibit you had to pay to go in, and of the 110 photographs, 7 were controversial, and they had a black screen around them. You had to go behind the screen, and everybody knew what was there. They went, and then they came out and said, this is disgraceful. This should not be allowed under any circumstances. Completely forgetting that in Pipestone, Minnesota, people needed $10,000 to buy a storefront just so they could put the lettering on the window and begin to develop something which they now call, it looks like a grocery store to you and me, but to them, it's the Pipestone Center for the Performing Arts. And that came from the National Endowment of the Arts. There are thousands of stories like that. Thousands of stories of how rural America has profited by the virtue of support for urban artists to spend time in rural America. And so what we have in America today is a climate in which our social ills are extreme. It took one American president 4 years before he could utter the word AIDS, let alone do something about it. And in terms of criminality, the statistics are very much in our favor. They are going down. Except the environment which creates criminality has not changed appreciably. Law enforcement has become more effective, but the environment hasn't changed. It's at best a haphazard and temporary and ultimately ineffective remission. And so we could go on and on about the ills in American society, and against this, the one agency that offers significance as a reminder of what beauty is in life, a more noble and grand vision of what life can be, hope for all of us, over the next mountain, that sunrise, what life can become, that indomitable American hope that brought ancestors west, but that also built beauty. In every one of these communities, there was an opera house. An opera house used for discussion of contrasting and contradictory opinions in the most peaceful sort of way. 6 shooters left outside. And the visiting performers who came through. There was a need, there always is a need. When you go to Europe, when you go visiting, where do you go? The museums, the antiquities, the beauty of the foreign culture. That's what we are all drawn to. And now in America, today, we stand to become the only nation in Western civilization and a good portion of Eastern civilization which will not have in its government an agency for the support of the betterment of life through the arts. The only nation. In exchange, we are the only NATO nation wherein children can go to bed at night within the earshot of gunfire. Constantly. Against this backdrop, we are talking about building Goals 2000, spending $10 billion, and not a word is mentioned about humanity, about compassion, about sensitivity, about uniqueness, about fostering society as a decent and thriving and inspiring center for learning, discerning, and enjoying. It was a very interesting article I read a couple of years ago. The ex-president of France, President Mitterrand, was bogged down with his council of ministers. France was going through a terrible time economically. And the rest of the nations of economic unity in Europe were looking toward France as a way of wondering about what they were going to do to clean up their act, to fix up their own particular center for incorporation into the continental economic environment and spirit. And so Mitterrand was listening constantly to people wedded to their own policies, their own philosophy. The author of this textbook, who of course could not deviate from his own policies, his students were watching. The author of that particular persuasion paper, whose bosses were watching. And this person who stood, who would be only able to say that that if I don't understand anything beyond this, or if I can't conceive of anything beyond this, then it doesn't exist. So we have all these contradictory elements at large, and Mitterrand was just getting violently frustrated by this. So he ordered the following. He said to the Council of Ministers that on this day next month, you will sit in a chamber and unable to speak, and I will call in artists. I will call in writers, poets, musicians, dancers, choreographers. I will call in a cross-section of the finest artistic thinking in our land, which is considerable, considerable. And I don't know how many he had, about 60 or 70. He brought them in, and the Council of Ministers was forced to listen to them for several days. Listen to people who knew nothing about the economy, explain how they would go about fixing the economy. Because what Mitterrand knew was that in this room was a phenomenal resurgence of creativity, an electric energy of creativity, not bound by tradition, not bound by convention, and not at all aggravated by those around them. And so they listened. 90% of it was fascinating and worthless in terms of realizing the dream. But there was a new 10% that came out. Don't ask me the moral to the story, the answer, I don't know. What I do know was, what a courageous act. What a statement on behalf of creativity. To find the people who are the most creative, who do it for a living. In fact, in America, the only reason why artists survive is because they are creative. They can figure out how to do it against a society that is non-supportive. They always figure it out. And that's what Mr. Gingrich knows, and that's what bothers me. That rather than be supportive and make a positive statement on behalf of what creativity can be, on behalf of what it can afford all of us, and I mean all of us, if not for you, if you feel that this is not your bag, your bailiwick, not your interest, should you allow your children and grandchildren to come into a world with your prejudice? Isn't the object of parenthood or older generations to make life better? Isn't it to leave something where something wasn't before? Zoltán Kodály, the great Hungarian composer, said, everyone brings his or her brick as we build walls. Everyone brings a brick, and we must make it better, smoother and firmer. We must do that. That is what we do. That is the dignity of living, that we make something better than it was. You go home to your lawns and you admire beauty. You want it to be better than when you found it. And so it should be in the artistic climate and environment of our nation. It's not that the artists should be leaders of society, but the artists, according to Beethoven, are the teachers of society. Beethoven called himself a Tonedichter, a tone poet. And the poets are the leaders of society. They are the teachers of society. They show us the way. How do they show us the way? Politics into art, into politics. Beethoven's Third Symphony, called the Eroica. How is it that a German composer writes a symphony giving it an Italian title, dedicates it to a French emperor? What is the spirit of internationalism that caused that? And when the emperor declared himself emperor, Beethoven tears up the dedication and writes, to the memory of a great man, and puts a funeral march into the second movement. And the funeral march tells us of the death of an ideal, Prior to Napoleon's crowning himself, Beethoven was going to move to France, because in 1789, when he was 19 years old, rather impressionable, and that French Revolution came, it shook the world, but it shook Beethoven hardest of all. He said then, I'm going to write a symphony someday based on Schiller's Ode that will commemorate the French Revolution. And so the last symphony he wrote was already firmly being born. So there is a direct relation and correlation between art and politics and life. Music includes science, languages, philosophy. Music includes architecture, the visual arts. And music talks about those who violate the trust of human leadership, who practice no compassion, or who are affected by no compassion, as we know from the music of Shostakovich, who writes in the 7th Symphony his admonition. It's called the Leningrad Symphony, and he says, this is a symphony not about Leningrad under siege. This is a symphony that's about the Leningrad that Stalin destroyed and Hitler merely finished off. There are thousands of stories like this about works of art which tell us of a time and a place and an effect. It tells us that the composer is an eyewitness and that we would do very, very well were we to look through his or her eyes and use our own ears to try to find ways to make our society whole and complete. If someone like Bach can write with such harmonic complexity that works in such a powerful way in harmony with great harmoniousness, if that complexity can be realized by one person on the earth, surely we can do something simple as to reinvent society to the point where it is again good. Thank you very much.
Conductor Sidlin, can you describe for us what efforts are underway in this community, both geographically and programmatically, to make the arts more accessible, to put down roots for the counterparts of those kids in those curfew scofflaws in Gilroy, to encourage them to stay home and listen to the classics on their own?
Next question. That's a very long and involved subject, but let me try to capsulize what I think needs to take place. There are efforts taking place. We at the Oregon Symphony surround ourselves with wonderful educators, Alan Dobbins being the chair of our education committee, who is a person extraordinarily compassionate to all matters of public education and guides us well to try to discover and uncover and unfold new dimensions for communication. We do a series of young people's concerts, not enough. We know that. We invite children to our rehearsals. We have a series with Multnomah Cable Television. Is that who you guys are? Are they Multnomah Cable Television? I was about to say something nice, but if you're not, then I don't have to. I don't want to waste the time. But we do a series called Oregon Symphony Fanfare, where we interview our guest artists and we allow teachers to tape off the air and allow young people to get to know intimately, in a very friendly sort of way, people like Pinchas Zuckerman and Lynn Harrell and Garrick Olson and Morton Gould and Nadja Salerno Sonnenberg and James the Priest and people like that. So we can learn that artists are human. They just happen to think differently, act differently, and they're trained differently to bring society dimensions which are rather crucial and needed. I would like to see, and we have begun talking about it in our education committee, and I am committed to, during my time here, to try to get all university presidents in this community throughout the state to make stronger requirements for artistic experiences, for musical experiences, for courses taken, for information and sensitivity about the arts digested as a requirement to entering colleges. If in fact the colleges are, if in fact the high schools are responsive to the laws of higher education, it seems to me that higher education could call the shots. That if these college university presidents, and at Pacific University there's a new president, Faith Gabelnick, who is from Mills College and a devout liberal artist, or liberalist of arts, any way you want to look at it. But there she is, and she's quite capable and understands the meaning of, and there are others too, Janet Romali, and I'm sure I'm going to leave people out. But these are the people that we need to lobby and legislate to say, in effect, that we want the students entering this institution to be better versed in the arts and to have a broader view and range of what the arts can mean to one's life. If the universities will do that, we'll see the response on upper education and secondary education and even earlier. And the question of elimination of program simply won't be a question in the future. It has to be brought as an edict from above. Think about 1956 when Eisenhower said, oh my God, Sputnik's up, science is important. What happened to math and science in this country? It's got to start at the top, and then it filters down very quickly.
Sally Bonnell, City Club member. Typically, people from the arts and their parents do not show up at school board meetings when decisions related to the arts are being made. How would you possibly change that? And also, how would you go about translating the arts as you have done, their importance to other fields of endeavor, like the high-tech industry, for example?
How would I convert the high-tech industry? Okay, in 30 seconds or less. Let me take the first part of the question first. These are very legitimate questions. Why don't they show up? It's because the edict is made first, and then you ask them to advocate. Why don't you ask them to help with the decisions? Why don't you ask them to set the philosophy? These are the people who have something to say, who have a vested interest in the arts. And I suspect that if they are not asked afterwards, but asked to be integral into the process, and that their expertise is valued. And I think it's possible you might get more cooperative spirit. I tend to stay away from situations like that too, unless I'm asked in advance, because I find it difficult to respond to ideas which I think perhaps are a bit naive in terms of arts education. But if I'm asked to participate in the act of making a philosophy for arts education in the school, I find to be myself that somehow where I didn't have the time 10 minutes ago, I now have the time to do that. Regarding technology, the problem there is that the people who are leaders in technology are very often those people who are technologists, and their own experiences are limited in terms of the arts. Every now and then you find the right person who is a music buff or a visual arts buff or a literature buff or something like that, and the sensitivity exists. I don't know that we can change how private industry works. I know that if in education we emphasize the arts in relation to the whole, then all sorts of wonderful things can happen. The problem began years ago, probably in the 1920s, when art and music and all other arts that were partly in the schools, drama or whatever it is, were relegated to the state of, what is it called, minor subject. And it has been minor ever since. So it's very easy to take a red pencil to minor. You can't do that to English, you can't do that to science, you can't do that to math. If anything, you can, I remember once Dr. Beerworth made a statement in a meeting that the cuts in the Oregon schools that will affect music are the same cuts that are across the board. Yes, but if you cut 20% of the science budget and 20% of the music budget, you are decimating music where you are making science a little bit more difficult to teach well. There's a big difference between decimation and difficulty. And so if I happen to firmly believe, as I know many of you do, that the answer to so much of what we need to do for society is in education. It's in learning. It's in enlightenment. And it is in application of that enlightenment by giving opportunities And creativity is the most important force that young people have. They are the least prejudiced people for learning that we have. It's adult prejudice foisted onto the children that creates the problem. It's adults who might not like classical music. The kids have nothing against it. They don't have the knowledge to discriminate yet. We can take them into a concert hall, and I can explain a piece of Schoenberg for them and get them dancing out of the hall. You won't come when you see the name Schoenberg. They don't know that. They don't know the difference. It's your prejudice. It's your prejudice that is hurting the opportunities for the children, because they don't have that kind of problem. And so what we need to do is to really adopt for ourselves a more liberal attitude and a wider vision that says just because I don't like it does not invalidate it for children. And I think it's a very important concept. We can still grow into that. It's never too late. It's never too late. We just have to be wiser and more compassionate. Other questions?
A written question. Where did you get your passion for the arts?
I hate questions like that. You can't accuse me of that. You know, I can't answer that. I can't answer that. People are driven to certain things. There's an area in all of us, which for want of a better term, I call the area of knowing. If you think instinctively without words, there's an area in all of us that is a knowing area. It's where perception comes from. It's where your feelings take over when you don't block them with language that is a barbed wire. And I think in most artists and artistic people, that area of the knowing is very well developed. So I think it is rather chemical. I think that whereas if in your different sort of life than mine, your brain chemistry went that way, mine goes a little bit this way. And in so doing, I'm able to get into this area of wonder, of knowing, where I don't block the thoughts with language, but I sense things, same as you, except that mine is better developed. And as a result of that, because I've been doing this since I've been 6 years old, as a result of that, I can feel and I can wonder, and somehow I also spend a lot of time illuminating for others. But the passion comes from a belief in all the goodness of humanity, regardless of the evidence. I remember years ago when we were discussing, I was on the committee with Carl Sagan to decide what music was going to go onto the Voyager satellite that's been thrust around Jupiter and is on the way out to Neptune now, I guess. I don't know. It's way out there. This is a lifespan of 300 million years, this particular mission, and we had to decide on 2 hours of music to go on this spaceship, and which can be activated by solar batteries. There's a diagram of how to do it if this is ever intercepted by beings, or if it should ever wind up someplace. We have no idea, but when you get into a committee like this, you have to act on faith. Otherwise, you sit there and you say, what does it matter? Who cares? So today I'm the music director of the universe. Ha! Big deal. De Priest only has the Oregon Symphony. I've got the universe. So you have to sit there and decide how you want to be represented. And in addition to the music that went on, this is the punchline, in addition to the music that went on, which was considerable and wonderful on the Voyager ship, there was also an hour of Earth sounds. And the largest debate took place with Carl Sagan and Tim Ferriss and myself and a few others. The largest debate took place on whether or not there should be the sound of a gunshot. Whether this is a violation of the human experience or a natural part of the human experience. Try that at your, talk among yourselves. Try that at your dinner table tonight. And we decided to delete it. You say yes, but when it comes time to act in crime in your community, you're in public now, you have to say yes. What happens when you go home? What happens when you're alone with your thoughts? I'm among those that goes right past Sally Struthers when I see those awful, tragic children, those babies. I can't take it. I can't take it. I'm also the sort of person, I give out all my money in the streets of New York. 90,000 homeless. You got to walk past somebody every 5 minutes. And it's a terrible thing. But I think that what happens to you is that your sense of reality connects with your sense of knowing that there is a greatness to be had and to be experienced and be developed as a society, as a world. You know that, and you're brought up to it. And time after time, you will meet up with people who will call you naive and say, knowledge and skills, son, that's where the money is. And you have to just fight that off. You just have to fight it. And what you have to do is you have to go into the concert hall and say, I know you feel that way, but I'm going to play great Beethoven for you because I want you to change.
Thank you so much for your message today. The theme today was expose yourself to art. Conductor, you have done more than that. You have articulated very meaningly that people like us, organizations like City Club, must reach out to our congressmen and our fellow human beings to make them feel the importance of what you have said today and the passion represented by what you said today. We thank you so much for being here. It's been a wonderful program. Thank you all for being here. The meeting is adjourned.